In this lesson, we're going to be creating an animation for our text. Okay, so let's just get situated here. I'm going to come up and lock my flower and leaves layers and unlock all the letters for the text. And we'll turn back on their visibility. Okay? So you can see that they are now overlapping quite a bit with our little logo. So the way that I want to animate these in is similarly to the way that the buds came in, where they scaled up to their full size from the bottom or the base of the stem. But I also want the letters to have a little bit of a bounce in them. So they kind of come up and then back down and hit. And then just kind of ripples through, and then once it gets to this P, it'll bounce those flowers up, and then they can go back into their original position. So let's get started with our T. Now to figure out where we want the T to start, I'm just going to scrub to kind of find about where the end of that animation for the flowers is. So right in there around 4 seconds. And a great way to mark that is just to come over here, grab your comp marker bin, and just drag one over to your current time indicator. And you can hold shift to snap it on right there at the 4-second mark. Now I'm going to grab all my letters and pull them over so they don't even begin until that marker, also holding shift to snap them into place. So let's get started with our T. I know that I want this to grow from the bottom of the letter. So I'm going to need to move my anchor point before I even start that scale animation or change the position. In fact, I'll need to do this for all of my letters. And to make sure that I have the anchor point in the same place for all of them, at least along the x-axis here on the bottom, I want to add a rule line. So I'm going to come over here and choose my grid and guide options and choose rulers. And then I'm just going to drag a ruler down to the very bottom of all those letters. And this is going to help me to be able to move those anchor points much more quickly. So I'll grab my pan behind anchor point tool and pull it down here, and it's going to actually snap onto that rule line. Now I want it to be pretty much in the center of the letter, so I can just kind of align it with that purple dot. Let's go ahead and repeat that for a few of our other letters here. So just kind of pulling that into place. And for this one, I'm actually going to want it to come from the bottom of the P letter. So I'll drag another rule line down to the bottom of those. And actually, I'm going to place that kind of right in between the Y and the P. And then we'll pull that down into place. Okay, so that's going to help quite a bit with getting those into position. So I'm just doing it from the southernmost point of the letters. Besides the P's, they're a little bit high on those. And then we'll repeat the same for the S, H, O, and then we'll do the same thing where we pull it a little bit lower for that final letter P. Okay, great. So now let's come back over to our T now that those have been prepared and actually create our animation. So I'm going to bring up the scale property by hitting the S key, and I'm also going to bring up the position. So I'll hold down shift and hit P so that I'm looking at both of those. So I'll set a key on this first frame for the scale at 100, and then I'm just going to pull that forward a little bit, and then I'll take this down to 0. So now it's going to set me another key, so it'll go from 0 to 100. So you can kind of see how that grows over time. And to get this a little bit more in the idea of what we want this to look like, I'm going to hold shift and hit page down, and that's actually only 10 frames. So let's actually pull this back pretty far so we've got those 10 frames for that letter to animate during. Maybe even a little bit more. Maybe let's do 12. So I'll add page down a couple of times. So we've got 12 frames for that animation to happen. Now I'm going to go back 3 frames. And at this frame, I'm going to say, let's scale this up to 105. So we get that same little exaggeration on the T where it gets bigger and then smaller again. Now to really add to this, I want to change the position slightly over time as well. So with its original position, I'm going to go ahead and hit the stopwatch. And I also want it to end in that same position as well. So I'll hit that add key button over here. Now I'm going to come back to about halfway through, that'd be on the 6th frame, and just hit Shift and the up arrow to move this up very slightly. Now that might not be high enough, so I'll hit it again a couple of times. So I held Shift and hit the up arrow 3 times to move it up 30 pixels. So what it does is it kind of pops up and then comes back down. Now I think actually maybe I should move this 105 back so it overlaps with the same key for the highest position of the T. Perfect. So we kind of see that pop up and into place. Now I'm going to select all my keys and we'll go to Animation, Keyframe Assistant, and choose Easy Ease. So now we've got Easy Ease on those. And let's actually watch this through and see if it's too fast. I think that's perfect actually. So now what happens if we want to just copy and paste these keyframes to our next letter, our H? So I can grab my selection tool, just grab all my keys, hit Control C, select my H, and hit Control V. And you can see that the H takes on all of the properties of the position of the T, not just the up and down movement. So we've also attributed the X position to the H, even though it's not really contributing to the animation, it's moving the H over. So I want to be able to quickly reuse my keyframe data and not have to worry about this. Well, there's an easy way to do that. So I'm going to hit Control Z to undo adding that to the H, and we're going to grab our T and go into our graph editor. So click that and select your position for the T. Now what we have here is a button called Separate Dimensions. And if I click that and then I come back over here, you'll see that now I have X position and Y position separate instead of seeing them both side by side. So now I can go back out of the graph editor into my regular keyframe view, and you can see I've got a set of keys for the X position and a set for the Y. Now watch this number as I scrub over those keys. You'll see that the X position does not change. So again, it's not contributing to the animation at all. So we can simply come over here, make sure you deselect so you don't have all those positions selected. You only have the X position selected, and then you hit the stopwatch. And what that's going to do is get rid of those X keys, and now you just have the Y position keyed and the scale. Great. So now I can select my Y position, hold Shift and hit this and select the scale, hit Control C, select my H, and hit Control V. And now when I scrub, we're going to get this really nice little animation of the T and the H. And the H maintains its original X positioning. So if I select this layer and hit the U key, you'll see that the keys overlap. So I'd like to add a little bit of a stagger to those, just maybe a couple frames. So let's do 2 frames just by hitting page down twice, and we'll move those forward. Now we can scrub and you'll see that there's just a very slight stagger in those. Now I think it would be nice to have these keys easy eased, so I'll select them all and hit F9, or I can select them, go to Animation, Keyframe Assistant, and choose Easy Ease. Great. So now those are really looking good, and I want to add that to the rest of my letters. So I'm going to go ahead and move through and stagger for all the rest of the letters, copying and pasting them into place. And then in the next lesson, let's figure out how to create the interaction between the letters popping on and hitting this logo. And we'll see what we can create to make it look like the letters actually move the flowers up and then back into their original position.